Come around the fire, kids, and let me tell you a story that isn't folklore. This one is true. Kansas, 1872. The prairie is black and endless after sundown. Wind moves through the tall grass like something breathing. The trail is quiet now. The wagons stopped hours ago. Only one cabin shows light. A traveler named George Longcore had been riding all day with his young daughter. They were heading west. Like so many others, dust in their teeth, hope in their pockets. When he saw the lantern glow from the Bender cabin, it must have felt like mercy. A meal, a bed, 4 walls. Inside, the room was simple. A long table, rough boards, the smell of stew. A canvas curtain stretched across the back of the room, separating the dining space from the family's quarters. They sat him at the head of the table. That was the seat. His daughter was nearby, close enough to hear the spoon scrape the bowl, close enough to hear her father answer polite questions. Behind the curtain, someone waited. The hammer didn't come with a warning. It came from behind, a dull, sickening crack against bone. If the blow didn't kill him, the knife finished it. The trap door opened. The cellar swallowed him. His daughter survived, barely. She would later be found wandering the prairie days later, dehydrated and alone after her father vanished. Behind the cabin in the orchard, the soil would eventually give up its secrets. Bodies buried shallow, skulls crushed, throats cut. Not a rumor, not a campfire invention. A family of 4 had built a roadside inn along one of America's busiest frontier trails and turned it into an execution chamber. And for nearly 2 years, no one stopped them. The fire's getting low now, but the prairie was darker than this. You're listening to Deadly Truths with Becca, and this is The Frontier is Dead. Tonight, the story of the Bloody Benders, a quiet stretch of Kansas prairie, a roadside inn along the trail, a family of 4 who offered travelers a hot meal and delivered a hammer from behind a curtain. At least 10 bodies were buried in an orchard, a trapdoor beneath the dining table. This isn't a legend. This is the dark underbelly of westward expansion. The frontier wasn't wild because it was free. It was wild because no one was watching. Let's ground this first. The Bloody Benders settled in Labette County, southeastern Kansas, in the early 1870s. For listeners trying to picture it, about 1 hour, 45 minutes east-southeast of Wichita, about 2.5 to 3 hours south-southwest of Kansas City, roughly 30 minutes north of the Oklahoma border. In the 1870s, this wasn't developed farmland. It was raw prairie, tall grass, scattered homesteads, dirt trails cut through open land. Their claim sat directly along the Osage Trail, one of the main routes settlers used to head west after the Civil War. That trail brought constant traffic, drifters, land seekers, veterans, traders, and families. It was the perfect location for a roadside stop and the perfect place for someone to disappear. After the Civil War, the U.S. government encouraged westward expansion through the Homestead Act. Settlers could claim land, build on it, and eventually own it. Around 1871, the Benders filed a claim, like thousands of others. They built a small one-room cabin and eventually added a lean-to structure that functioned as a general store and informal inn. Nothing about the land claim itself was unusual. They weren't hiding in the wilderness. They were participating in an expansion. They presented themselves as John Bender Sr., father, Elvira, Ma Bender, John Bender Jr., and Kate Bender. Those names were almost certainly aliases. Neighbors described them as German-speaking immigrants with heavy accents. Most historians believe they were likely from Germany or a German-speaking region of Europe, but no verified immigration records confirm exact origins. That's important. Frontier Kansas in the 1870s had a strong German immigrant presence. Blending in wouldn't have been difficult. Their throats were then cut, likely to ensure death and reduce movement or noise. The method was disturbingly consistent. Kate, the daughter, was the most socially active. She spoke better English. She advertised herself as a healer and spiritualist. giving small lectures about free love and communicating with spirits. That helped bring people in. The father and son were described as quieter. The mother was considered stern, possibly volatile. They didn't seem remarkable. That's the point. They were just another homesteading family along a busy migration trail until travelers started vanishing. Witnesses reported that Dr. York had stopped at the Binder Inn. He was never seen again, and this time people didn't shrug it off. Why did York's disappearance matter? Travelers disappeared before him. But in frontier Kansas, that wasn't automatically suspicious. Men wandered, records were thin. York was different. He had connections. He had family with influence. He had people who demanded answers. When he didn't return, search parties formed. That's when neighbors began looking harder at the Binder claim, and that's when the illusion cracked. March 1873 in Labette County, Kansas, did not feel dramatic. The prairie wind moved as it always had, steady and indifferent. A small group of local men rode out along the Osage Trail toward the Binder homestead. They were not yet a mob. They were neighbors, officials, and concerned townsmen searching for Dr. William York, a respected physician who had gone missing after asking questions about earlier disappearances. When the search party reached the Binder claim, the property looked strangely intact. Livestock remained in place. The cabin door was shut. Nothing appeared ransacked. Yet, the stillness felt wrong. They knocked. No response. They entered. Inside, the cabin was unnervingly orderly. Beds were made. Dishes were stacked. But personal belongings were missing. The family had not left in chaos. They had packed. That realization settled heavily in the room. The men stepped into the dining area, where travelers had once been served meals. A long wooden table stood in the center. At its head sat a single chair, positioned directly in front of a canvas curtain that divided the public dining space from the family's private quarters. It was a simple arrangement, easy to overlook, but now it seemed deliberate. Someone pulled back the curtain. Nothing obvious appeared at first glance. The boards beneath the table, however, felt uneven underfoot. Suspicion shifted downward. When the men moved the table and examined the floor more closely, they found a crude trapdoor cut into the planks. They pried it open. Below was a shallow cellar with a dirt floor. The air rising from it was damp and metallic. The soil was darkened in irregular patches. Even without modern forensic science, they recognized what they were seeing. Blood had seeped into the earth over time, soaking and spreading into the packed dirt. There were no bodies in the cellar. The search moved outside. Behind the cabin lay a small orchard. Several patches of ground appeared freshly disturbed. The soil had been turned and hastily leveled. The men began to dig. The first body was discovered face down, buried shallow. The skull was crushed inward from a heavy blow. The throat had been cut deeply. The clothing remained intact, suggesting robbery but not stripping. As they continued digging, more bodies emerged from the Kansas soil. At least 10 victims were ultimately recovered from the orchard. Most showed the same pattern of injury: a crushing strike to the back of the head, followed by a deep cut to the throat. Among them was Dr. William York. His remains confirmed the growing horror. The trapdoor, the curtain, the chair at the head of the table, everything aligned. Victims had been seated in a specific position, struck from behind by someone concealed beyond the canvas divider, and dropped into the cellar before burial in the orchard. The method was not impulsive. It was structured. By the time the graves were uncovered, the Binder family was already gone. Their wagon had disappeared. Personal items had been removed. They had not fled in panic. They had anticipated discovery and left in advance. The prairie quickly erased what tracks remained. What stood behind that modest cabin was no longer an inn, but evidence of an organized killing operation operating in plain sight along one of the busiest migration routes in post-Civil War America. And the killers were nowhere to be found. The bloody Binders didn't flee in panic. They left in advance of the search party. That suggests awareness, not surprise. Here's what likely tipped them off. First, Dr. William York was not just another drifter. He was connected. That changes everything. Up until that point, most victims were lone travelers whose absences didn't immediately trigger organized searches. But once York's politically connected family began pressing hard, the risk level shifted dramatically. Second, there was growing community suspicion even before the final search. Several disappearances had clustered in the same region. Neighbors had started whispering. The prairie rumor mill moved fast. The Benders would have felt that shift in tone. Third, the search party didn't form overnight. It was built gradually. Men were riding around, asking questions. Land was being discussed publicly. In a small frontier community, you would hear that pressure building. By the time the formal search reached their cabin in March 1873, the Benders were already gone. The cabin wasn't abandoned mid-meal. It wasn't chaotic. Valuables were taken, livestock left, personal belongings packed. That indicates planning. In other words, they made a strategic mistake. They escalated from killing people who wouldn't be immediately missed to killing someone who absolutely would. When the digging was finished behind the Bender cabin in 1873, authorities uncovered at least 10 bodies in the orchard. That number is the documented minimum. Some later reports speculated there may have been more victims who were never found. But 10 is what was officially recovered and examined at the time. The graves were shallow. The soil had been disturbed but not deeply packed. Several bodies were buried in close proximity, suggesting the orchard had been used repeatedly over a period of months, possibly years. This was not a single outburst of violence. It was sustained. Most of the victims showed the same pattern of injury. The skulls were crushed from a heavy blow to the back of the head, consistent with being struck from behind while seated. Investigators also uncovered evidence inside the cabin itself. Beneath the dining table was a trapdoor leading to a shallow cellar. The dirt floor below showed dark staining consistent with repeated blood seepage. The cellar was not used for long-term storage of bodies. It appears to have been a temporary holding space before burial outside. What they uncovered was not random chaos. It was a system, a seating arrangement at the head of the table, a concealed attacker behind a curtain, a trapdoor beneath the floor, and a burial site just steps away. The orchard confirmed what the cabin suggested. This was organized, repeated killing carried out in a fixed location. At first, the neighbors did not describe the Benders as obviously monstrous. They were considered odd, somewhat standoffish, but not wildly out of place for frontier Kansas. The father and son were said to be quiet and socially distant. The mother was described as harsh and unpleasant. Kate, however, was remembered as charismatic and talkative. She hosted spiritualist sessions and gave small lectures, which drew people in rather than pushed them away. After the graves were uncovered, the tone shifted instantly. Shock is the first consistent theme. Many neighbors reportedly struggled to reconcile what had been found with the family they had known. Some men who helped search the property had eaten at that same table. That detail comes up repeatedly in accounts. The horror of realizing they may have sat in the very chair used to position victims. There was also anger. Once the bodies were found, posses formed quickly. The community demanded immediate pursuit. This wasn't a passive frontier shrug. It turned into a manhunt. Rewards were offered. Multiple groups claimed they tracked the family across state lines. At the same time, some accounts suggest there had already been suspicion before the final discovery. A few neighbors reportedly found the Benders unsettling. The clustering of disappearances along that stretch of trail had raised quiet concerns, but frontier life was chaotic enough that people didn't immediately jump to organized murder. It's also important to note how newspapers framed them. German immigrant status was emphasized heavily in reporting. The foreign family slaughtering Americans angle was amplified, which likely reflected the existing xenophobia of the period that shaped public memory of the case. In short, what we know is this: Before the orchard was dug up, they were strange but tolerated. Afterward, they were viewed as calculated predators hiding in plain sight. The shock came not from obvious warning signs, but from how ordinary the setup had appeared. And that's what unsettled people most. Newspapers began describing Kate as the primary lure. She was portrayed as attractive, articulate, and far more fluent in English than the rest of the family. According to multiple reports, she advertised herself as a healer and spiritualist. She gave small public talks about free love, spiritual communication, and psychic insight, topics that were controversial but popular in certain circles in the 1870s. That reputation would have made her memorable. Later accounts claim she used charm and conversation to draw in male travelers, especially those traveling alone. Some stories suggest she flirted openly or offered private consultations. The narrative that formed was that she softened targets socially while the father or brother prepared to strike from behind the curtain. But here's the important part. Much of the seductress lure image comes from newspapers after the crimes were exposed. Victorian-era reporting loved the trope of the dangerous, manipulative woman. It sold papers. It also reinforced cultural fears about independent women, spiritualists, and immigrant communities. We do not have direct evidence that Kate was romantically or sexually involved with victims. We do know she was the most socially engaging member of the family. We know she publicly advertised spiritual services. And we know most of the victims were male travelers who would have been more comfortable stopping at an inn where someone seemed friendly and welcoming. So it's plausible she played a role in putting victims at ease. And once the press labeled her a she-devil figure, that image stuck hard in American memory. This is where we have to separate what's documented from what feels ominous. The strongest documented motive is robbery. The Bloody Benders targeted solo travelers along the Osage Trail, men carrying cash, land deeds, livestock receipts, and personal valuables. Items were taken, horses were sometimes sold, money disappeared. This was not random violence. It was a strategic selection of victims who were mobile, untraceable, and unlikely to be immediately missed. So yes, money was central. But here's where it gets unsettling. If this were purely opportunistic robbery, you might expect variation in method, panic, sloppiness, escalation mistakes. Instead, what investigators uncovered suggests a routine. Victim seated at the head of the table, attacker concealed behind a curtain. Blow to the back of the skull, throat cut. The body dropped through a trapdoor. Burial in the orchard. That's choreography. That level of repetition points to desensitization. It also suggests they refine the method over time. You don't build a trapdoor killing system after one impulsive act. That takes planning and repetition. Now, about ritual. There is no evidence of occult symbolism, ceremonial markings, or ideological belief systems tied to the murders. The ritual feeling comes from the consistent staging and the almost mechanical pattern of execution. It wasn't ritualistic in a spiritual sense. It was ritualistic in a procedural sense. And procedural violence can feel colder than frenzy. As for whether they had killed before Kansas, that's the question historians can't answer. They were using aliases. Their backgrounds are murky. No confirmed immigration records tie neatly to them. If they had committed crimes in Germany or another region before emigrating, there is no known record connecting them to prior homicides. But the 19th century did not have international crime databases. Even within the U.S., tracking offenders across states was nearly impossible. It's plausible they arrived in Kansas already comfortable with violence. It's also plausible that frontier conditions created the opportunity and they adapted quickly. What we do know is this: by the time the orchard was dug up, they had killed repeatedly, without visible remorse. Whether that behavior began in Kansas or simply found its perfect environment there, we cannot prove. But the system they built along the Osage Trail did not feel like a first experiment. It felt practiced. and that's what lingers. Now we get to the part everyone wants, and the part history refuses to give cleanly. The bloody benders ran, their wagon was missing, personal items were packed, they executed a planned departure. After that, three main theories emerged. The first theory is vigilante justice. Several posses claimed they tracked the benders into Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, or farther south into Texas. Some accounts say they were shot and buried quietly. Others claim they were lynched and disposed of without a formal record. This version fits the frontier reality of the 1870s. The second theory is that they split up and disappeared under new identities. They were already using aliases. Post-Civil War America had no national identification system, no fingerprinting, and massive population movement westward. Blending into another immigrant community would not have been difficult. Over the years, several women were arrested claiming to be Kate Bender, but none were definitively identified as her. The third theory suggests they were arrested later under different names, but never conclusively linked to the Kansas murders. There were scattered claims of capture in states like Michigan, but no hard evidence tied those individuals to the Labette County killings. Most modern historians lean toward one of two conclusions. Either they were killed quietly by a posse, and the event was never formally recorded, or they successfully disappeared and lived out their lives under assumed identities. There is no credible evidence that they were ever publicly tried or legally executed. So honest closer is this. They built a killing system in plain sight along one of the busiest trails in the Midwest. They murdered at least 10 people. They were exposed, and then they stepped off the map. No trial, no confession, no gallows, just prairie wind over disturbed soil and a family that vanished into the American frontier. And that unresolved ending is why the story still grips people today. Several of those victims were identified, but not every name was preserved cleanly in records. This is important context. In the 1870s, many travelers on the Osage Trail were transient. They did not always have close family nearby. Some may have been immigrants themselves, laborers, or men seeking land. If no one pressed for answers, disappearances could go unrecorded. So while 10 bodies were documented, the true number of victims may have been higher. Some estimates over the years have suggested up to 20, but that is speculative and not supported by confirmed grave recoveries. The tragedy is not just the violence. It's that some of the dead were absorbed into the prairie without a clear historical footprint. What makes York's story heavy isn't just how he died, it's why he was there. He wasn't hunting land. He wasn't running from something. He was investigating another disappearance. He was trying to bring someone else home, and instead he became one of the graves behind the cabin. That's the moment the case shifts from eerie frontier rumor to undeniable horror. You've been listening to Deadly Truths with Becca. This is The Frontier is Dead. We like to romanticize westward expansion. We picture courage, opportunity, open skies, and second chances. But the truth is harder. The frontier wasn't just lawless, it was unobserved. There were no databases, no coordinated policing, no reliable way to track a family using false names. If you built a killing system behind a canvas curtain along a busy trail, you could operate in plain sight for years. The Bloody Benders murdered at least 10 people. They weaponized hospitality. They buried bodies beneath fruit trees. And when the community finally uncovered the truth, the killers were already gone. Maybe they were shot quietly in Indian Territory. Maybe they split up and lived long lives under new identities. Maybe they died as ordinary citizens somewhere else, never exposed. We don't get a gallows scene. We don't get a confession. We get an orchard, a trapdoor, and silence. Because understanding the past doesn't require defending it. Context explains behavior, but it doesn't absolve power. The American frontier wasn't just built on grit and ambition, it was also built on graves. And remember, the past isn't dead, it's just buried in an orchid, waiting for someone to dig it up.